Hi, and welcome back to the series on stories in literature as I examine those on how they interact with migrator theory, circle theory, and develop that book that's an integration of existentialism into social and helping professions and fields. Today is the first in a series of videos on The Witcher, which I'm actually recording this video a second time because my dog barked through the entire last one, ruined it all. So bear with me as I'm a little bit more burned. But as most people, I watched this show and got really excited. I had played the games. I loved The Witcher 3, but I had never given the books a chance. And so I started picking those up, and I found them really, really interesting. And I think before I can actually get into that, I need to start with who Sapkowski is. So I think he's actually a really interesting figure as a writer because he's not what I would expect based off this work. And so I find this difference from my expectations really interesting. So I had assumed that he had been somebody who must have studied mythology and literature by the depth of his tale. And the reality is he's actually studied economics and was a senior sales rep for a company that did foreign trade. And so, you know, most of his career had been in that type of work, which he does attribute to the success because he knew how to market his book, right? I mean, he knew how to sell it, he knew how to get it out of the country into a foreign market. And when he started getting into literature, he actually started as a translator. So he had translated sci-fi and fantasy into Polish and helped bring that into the country. And so at some point, one of the magazines that he would work with, one that had science fiction, they had a contest for short stories. So on a whim, he wrote The Witcher. And that's where we get our first short story. And it ends up being this cycle of tales that he expands on from there. And so the reason I think this is important is it seems like this moment of just creative access, as May would put it, that really comes to life all in one moment. And as somebody whose entire work is called circle theory, cycles kind of get me interested as well. But it's a series of collections and novels that come together to make a loose set of correlated stories based with the same character. So we kind of get the same frame to examine a world that is heavily influenced by Slavic mythology. This work has easily made him one of the best known authors to ever come out of Poland. And so getting into the first book, The Last Wish is basically just a series of separated short stories. Spoilers, of course, so you might want to hop off if you haven't read or seen. This follows the first season on Netflix pretty well. Some of that information is also in the second book I'm finding. But this is all framed as Geralt has been injured. He went and fought a monster, and he's injured. He's got to return to this temple, and he's really going through these different parts of his past why he's there. And so this is our context. It's him injured looking back with this perspective of the end of his time. He's understanding that he's getting less and less work and that the times are changing. His world isn't the same as it once was. And what I find interesting is while he's heavily influenced by Slavic mythology, what we have here is something that's really pulled from Grimm, right? It's very Brothers Grimm. And we're entering and exploring fairy tales. And as he's looking back, I'm very curious to understand how much of this is the character looking back on his past compared to how much he was actually there, right? How much has history and time and our new perspectives influenced how we see the past? Because he has a very mature perspective on his own past interactions. And at the core of all of this is defining monsters and defining the line between the monster and the monster hunter. It's very Nietzschean in that way, where we're looking at how long can you stare at the abyss before you come in, and the realization that when the monster goes away, so will you. He was created to fight monsters, and what does this mean in a world where we don't understand them? And what I find interesting is throughout this seems to be a large retelling of a lot of the stories in Beauty or in Brothers Grimm, right? Maybe Beauty and the Beast and things and so on and so forth that are very clearly pulled in. But each time we're getting it from the perspective of the monster. You know, one of our early stories is that Beauty and the Beast story where he finds the old castle and Geralt is just hanging out with the monster who has taken bride after bride and discovering what it means and having him have these conversations. The entire thing is this phase where they're just talking. It's almost psychoanalytic. It's the therapeutic relationship happening between Geralt and various monsters throughout it. And we see this play out in the story of the man trying to cope with him being a monster, and trying to discuss why it's better, and trying to argue it, and trying to prove it to a very uninterested Witcher, which is very fascinating. And understanding that actually what will pull him out of it is not only true love, but love and blood, which I find is to be really interesting, that we're taking this perspective that what fairy tales got wrong is that love isn't enough, but it's love and suffering that makes us change. And so what we see is this very dark, gothic take that suggests that there is a duality, and it's from suffering that we start to engage and shift and change. Love itself is not enough. And then as we move on, we start to talk about what the world around us means and how God fits into that. And I found that to be actually my favorite part. And I'm going to read a quote from the book. And this is from the conversation. He's back kind of the healing at the temple, and he's talking to somebody he's been friends with for a long time. And they have the back and forth, and he's basically insulting the priestess of religion. She responds with, "I'm not a fanatic. You have a right to believe that we're governed by nature and the force hidden within her. You can think that the gods are merely a personification of this power invented for simpletons so that they can understand it better, accept its existence. Brault faith allows you to expect what my goddess personifies from nature: order, law, goodness, and hope." And I was blown away at this point, where it became very clear that what we're talking about is that we find meaning in things outside of ourselves, and these abstract ideas of law and goodness and hope. And when we culminate them together and get an idea of something to follow, and she's arguing and understanding that if the Witcher is ever going to find a meaning past his fight, it will have to be in something else. But he understands that the wisdom of the angels is to be found in fairy tales. It's not worth a shit wisdom like that, as he says. And what he's talking about is that the stories that I have learned, it turns out they're not right. I was told to do these things. I was pushed into this. I was forced into this way of being. And I've never found the happiness or the things that I was promised. And because of that, I think that I might be able to understand the perspective of these monsters, because that's their deal. They didn't ask to be monsters, but they became them. And it's the first time we start to see some justification, as poor as it is. And we see several different monsters and how they justify their actions. And what I find interesting is there's always somebody that says, "I get your justification, I hear you, but you're still wrong." But he takes the time to understand the monster he fights. He listens to the wizard explain why he puts princesses in towers. And he clearly disagrees with him. He still doesn't let him die. So what I think we find is a very Maslowian figure. He's actually, Kohlberg might be better. He's reached the stage of moral development where he has his own code. It's the Batman code, right? He's reached the stage of, here's what I stand for. And he doesn't waver. There's certain things he just doesn't accept, even if he despises the philosophy of another. But he understands that his way of being is over. It says we're at the end of fairy tales, right? We're learning how to deal with monsters. And I think that's really interesting, is what he sees is the times are changing. And for most of human history, the monsters have been lineage from mice and men, right? I mean, we haven't fought the real monsters. But what Witcher sees around him is a world that's starting to live with them. He finds the town that doesn't want to get rid of the troll, right? They pay him, they let him say his silly riddles, and he's the one who fixes the bridge. They figured out how to cohabitate. We don't need to throw people into empty psych wards like we used to. And so what it is the story of professional obsolescence in a time when the profession is magic and magic runs dry. And so I'm excited to explore this story further through a psychoanalytic and existential lens. If you're interested in any of this discussion, please make a comment, make a like, make a share. I really want to talk about this stuff. I'm fascinated, love having these discussions. There's other videos up in this corner by magic somehow. You can subscribe right over here. Other videos will be coming out on Stories and Literature every Monday, but there's a video every day of the week covering different topics. And the Winter series will come out as I finish the books, and I will add them as well. So I look forward to seeing whoever may have the be doomed by fate to stumble upon these videos. Catch you next week.